Hey, welcome back to the Cycle World podcast. I'm editor-in-chief Mark Hoyer. I'm wearing a vintage hat, and I'm with Kevin Cameron, our technical editor. This week's episode is a special episode sponsored by Mecum Auctions, and we have selected a long list of motorcycles. Kevin did what Kevin does, and he picked very interesting historical references and some real high-profile motorcycles and some things we might not think of as important, but are. And that's Kevin's contribution to this podcast, and mine is I like motorcycles. So I picked
Which we all do.
Yeah,
Which we all do.
absolutely. But I picked a list that was more like my emotional touchstones from junk I couldn't afford when it was new, which is or you couldn't get some forbidden fruit bikes that.
Well, that's perfectly fine because I would love to have one of those 1950s Italian 125 Grand Prix bikes with gears all the way up one side of the engine. So elegant, but not the price.
Yeah, not the price, and sometimes even the shims you need to buy to put all that together.
But this is the mechanical smorgasbord for the motorcyclist, and you could go to something like this just to see it.
Yeah.
And to see the others doing their thing.
Yeah, it's a spectacle. The Vegas motorcycle auction is the biggest motorcycle auction of the year, period. It's Wednesday, January 29th to Saturday, February 1st, 2025. Welcome to the new year, folks. It's a scene. It's 2,000 bikes and a ton of memorabilia as well. And they've got packers and shippers. So if you buy a bike, it's relatively straightforward to get it out of there and back to where you live. And the same with safely packing all the there's just an incredible amount of memorabilia and art and so forth. But, we're here for the bikes. There's 2,000 roughly that will be expected to go across the block. One interesting thing I found out about recently was Mecum Financial Services, which means you can finance your bike, and you do a quick online sign up, and they'll like pre-approve you, and then you do a little paperwork, but they'll give you an amount of money that you can deal with that is essentially, as far as the buyer is concerned, the same as cash. Maybe not for you, but you have that ability to set something aside. So if you wanted to say, I don't know, pick up there was a 1908. I was looking at the most expensive bike that Mecum has sold, or anyone has sold, I believe. It's a 1908 Harley-Davidson strap tank. It sold for $935,000. I think if you're buying that bike, you're probably not financing, but there are plenty of things you could. That motorcycle kind of highlights the importance, or let's say the durability or strength of a highly original motorcycle. And I think that it's something that's been reflected, particularly in more recent auction results and sales results, is a high degree of originality is coveted, particularly with this kind of era of Harley, because they only made, I want to say 400, I think that year, 500 bikes. And there are not that many of them out there, but the ones that do exist are sort of put together from parts, or there's a lot of reproduction stuff on it. And this bike came out of a Milwaukee barn, in 1940 something. And then it was unrestored for maybe 60 years after that. And then there it is. And it's highly original, and it has an unbroken chain of ownership. And that's highly coveted. So that's the high end. What's great about the auction and having 2,000 bikes is there's literally something for everyone's thing. You have your I was on the website Mecum's website looking up bikes, and I'm like, oh, Bimota KB1, or I look at the Yamaha V500R, the Japanese market aluminum frame. This is foreshadowing, but you click on that one, and I click on that Yamaha, and then it says you might like, and it sorts the other bikes out that I might like, and it shows me lots of other plastic fairing Gammas and other two strokes. It's pretty cool. Anyway, with 2,000 bikes, there's upmarket, there's mid-market, and then there's just a ton of other stuff where you can get a pretty run-of-the-mill, nice Triumph TR6 with a single carburetor, 1970 or something, and that I think they called it harvest yellow, but it looks kind of green.
Yeah.
There's just something for everyone. And as you were saying, even if you go and you don't buy anything, I mean, I made the mistake of not registering to bid, and a matchless went across this really. I was like spectating. I'm like, oh, I'll just go see what it's about. This is many years ago, and a matchless, the street matchless, like a '66, one of the last years. Really nice bike came across, and it was a real bargain. Like it was no reserve. It had come out of a museum, and it was $3,000 or something, and I'm like, oh, and I didn't register, and I will never make that mistake again. Even if I
Yeah.
didn't have a plan, you just never know. Anyway,
Was that a twin?
no, it's a single. It's
It was a
500
single.
single. Yeah,
Okay.
but it's the last year, and it had the good electrics, and it was
Mhm.
like sort of as good as it got for we're getting a whiff of modernity. Like it might
Yes.
actually continue to charge. So
Yes.
it's not a it's not a Miller 6-volt generator driven by a V belt. So,
Yes.
or
Frightening.
maybe it was. Anyway, Wednesday the 29th through Saturday, February 1st. It's coming right up. It's a pretty amazing show, and I hope to be there myself. Let us begin, Kevin.
Yeah.
Anyway, you can click a link in the description. It'll take you to the auction site, and you can view the lots sorted out by collection. If you want, you can. It's got very good searchability. The collection thing is interesting to me because there's a guy, Paul Adams, for example, who I know from the Velisat Club, and he's a noted Norton expert, but he's an expert, period. Like he's just a good engineer and machinist, and his bikes I would describe as molecularly restored. He really, if you buy a Paul Adams bike, I feel like you're going to get something that's exquisite, and so he's got all these overhead cam Nortons and a few Velisats and stuff that he's if it comes out of that collection, I feel like that's the Norton I got to get, and that also is foreshadowing. let's start with a bike off of your list, Kevin. It's a lot S124, and it's a 1950 Vincent.
Ah, well, the Vincent, of course, like the Bruff Superiors of the even deeper past, is a motorcycle that is being gradually transmuted into legend as the motorcycles disappear into the collections of those who can still afford them, which have effective security systems and so forth. Us proles on the outside have to be satisfied with the legendary aspect. And who has not seen the photograph of Rolly Free on the salt at Bonneville, lying horizontally in bathing shorts only? Now, he set a record at 150 miles per hour. Was he thinking about what the salt would do to his bare skin if he were to have a mishap? So this causes us to think, what men or gods were these? And we love to have heroes and persons who did apparently impossible or completely inadvisable things. The Bruffs are similarly adorned by T.E. Lawrence, who was a sort of camel riding secret agent trying to thwart German designs in the Middle East during World War I. But he owned 7 Bruffs over a period of time. So the Vincent is also a very substantial influence on modern motorcycles because it had no frame. It was hard to get steel in any form immediately after the war, which had ended just 5 years previous. But there was lots of aluminum from the thousands of Merlin aircraft engines that were being melted down. And so they made a unit construction engine, which had a flowing organic shape, dish dish all sections. And there was a welded steel box beam which bolted to the two cylinder heads, and at its foremost extension became the steering head. So that's one feature. And
Well,
John, yes?
Well, when I did my resume to get my job at Cycle World, it was kind of unconventional. It was a list of bullet points. I called it my catastrophe vitae, my CV, and the vital catastrophes of my life. And the first bullet point was darkness. The second bullet point was saw Vincent Black Shadow. And the third bullet point was saw Jaguar E-Type. So that dates me a certain way. But what you say about that engine, the way the V was shaped, the V, the timing, the push rod tubes, and then the sweep of the exhaust. Is that hinting at some organic truth about shape?
Well,
and meaning, because it's so hard to know. You're so imprinted sometimes when you see something for the first time.
There are two levels on which you and I would look at these motorcycles. On one level, we would say, "Oh, it has this feature which came from so and so. It has this other feature because that was an answer to problems that existed then." All cause and effect thinking. But on another level, there is the imprinted thinking. When we were too young to understand the other level, we formed a mental image that has stayed with us. So those widely splayed pushrod tubes are there because of the high cam concept. Vincent, when they designed their 500 single, instead of adopting overhead camshaft like so many others, Velocet, AJS, Norton, they put the camshafts up high on the engine so that the push rods would be quite short, thus getting a third of the way to overhead camshaft in terms of weight in the valve train. This gives that strange double V look, and the smoothness of the flowing smoothness of the crankcases is like certain clothing that reveals very little, but just enough to permanently have your interest. I think, and of course, the Vincent from the very start, from schoolboy drawings made by Phil Vincent, had a swing arm that was triangulated. And when they built their own engine in the mid 1930s and they went to the TT, they were able to finish seventh behind 4 factory Nortons, 2 factory NSUs, all of which were 500 singles. And here comes this Vincent. And writers at the time were saying that the rear suspension appeared to be functional and was not a source of wobbling and instability.
Yeah.
Well, the idea of a functional rear suspension was a novelty in 1930. And of course, along came Moto Guzzi. Stan Woods won the senior TT in 1935 with a swing arm. But Vincent's suspension was hydraulic damped. It wasn't little clutch discs with a big wing nut. There, that'll take care of it.
Friction damping, folks. Friction damping.
Tighten it up when you're going really fast. Slack it off at all of the times, because it just made the suspension move in little steps if it was tightened down. But it was cost effective. Tubular shock absorbers did exist at that time, but it took a while for them to filter down to motorcycles. So there's the Vincent. Heavy heavy with historic drama and with heroic deeds, and at the same time pioneering frameless construction, which of course John Britton mentioned when I first met him. He said that Vincent was his inspiration for making the first Briton with the skin and bones carbon frame. He had spools attached to the cylinder heads, and he had a steering head at another position, and then he wound carbon fiber, carbon roving around these spools until he felt that he had triangulated everything nicely. Then that material was wetted out and cured, and then he sheeted in all these triangular spaces. Well, this was the direct outgrowth of the welded steel box that I just described, bridging the Vincent's two cylinders and carrying the steering head at the front end. So that's how they got around the fact that you couldn't buy a lot of steel tubing just then in England. And it also turned out to make a very compact 1,000cc motorcycle. Quite a different proposition from the Bruffs, which were much longer in wheelbase and heftier looking. But of course, we can't very well compare Rolly Free with T.E. Lawrence because they couldn't have lived in more farther apart realities.
Yeah, Black Shadow, kind of to cap it off, what you say is true. The imprinting was strong. And as I read about it coming up in Motorcycle Enthusiasm and subscribing to Cycle World in 1982, you read about the Vincent, and what you get is it had a lot of performance. You know, it's a 1950s motorcycle that went 150, and there weren't that many motorcycles even in the 80s that were capable of 150.
You bet.
So you have this idea of what it, that it had some magical power, and maybe it did. Well, it certainly still does, doesn't it? Because they're highly coveted for the pointy end of the collecting space where you got to spend a little money.
Yeah.
I think one of the nice things though is that, there are the outliers like the strap tank Harley I was talking about, but by and large, you can buy some of the finest motorcycles ever made for very little money compared to the car world where,
Yes.
Just the car world in general. The new car sales in the United States, call it 13 to 15 million, motorcycles 750,000, something like that. So just the whole scale of cars is different. And it's nice to have an auction like this where you just go and see thousands of bikes. But Mecum does take motorcycles to a bunch of different auctions across the country. I want to use one of my bikes here. It's a 1984 Yamaha RZV 500R. That's the one I was talking about. So why would I be interested in that bike? It made an impression. And at the time, especially, forbidden fruit, because we didn't have these bikes. There was the RZ 350, which was for sale in 84 and 85 in the United States. That was like the swan song for the street two-stroke, had catalytic converters. Very cool bike. I would take one of those. They're still affordable. I have seen some go for crazy money, low mile, because they did get beat pretty hard. Wonderful. But the RZV 500R, this is a lot 202.1 S202. That means Saturday. It's a 500cc V4 two-stroke. And I won't say just like what Wayne Rainey and Kenny Roberts were racing, but
no, because it wasn't.
Yeah, but heavily inspired by it. It was
absolutely
a V4, and it had the paint, and it had 4 pipes, 4 expansion chambers, and it just made that sound of power, particularly at the time, because like what were 4 strokes? Right? Diesel's heavy, slow.
When they started up, Kenny's 1980 championship winning Yamaha in the restoration area of the Barber Museum.
Oh, last fall. Yep.
It sounded right. It just sounded like itself. And that was a time when GP racing it was 100% two-stroke ever since 1975. And for people who had spent their lives working with two-strokes, as I did, these these GP bikes were the untouchable ultimate. Even though I knew in my rational core that they had a lot of very similar parts to what you would find in a TZ250 at the time. So I got the chance to take apart a Canadian 500, and it was a big disappointment. First of all, the exhaust system weighed 42 pounds.
Had to. I mean, I know, but you're coming from a Grand Prix background, and you're making like paper thin expansion chambers in your shop, and like Yamaha's making a production bike. What we got out of it was a whiff of Grand Prix racing, and no, it wasn't a replica, but it was a street going V4 liquid cooled. They had a claimed 88 horsepower in 1984.
Yeah.
Which if you go to take a 86 GSX-R 750, I think they were claiming 100 horsepower out of a bike that was 50% larger. So you had, everybody replaced. Well, not everybody, because the bike that's listed, I think, has looks like stock expansion chambers, which is a hard thing to get at this point for if you're going from the collector route. But like the next bike, anyway, 4 carburetors, 6-speed.
Another disappointment right there, because we know that on the GP bikes, the carburetors were pointed forward in the V, and where they fed reed valves, large area reed valves of the type that were pioneered by Honda, really, in 82 on their NS Triple. But this Yamaha was having a period at this time of spending their R&D money on the core engine and then saying, okay, that's done, but let's do the chassis. How much budget have we got? I've been trying to tell you for a couple of days, sir. $5. And so where are we going to put the carburetors? Well, we're going to put a 90-degree angle in the intake and have the carburetors at the sides. And there were a number of things like that you just yearned to say, let's spend $10,000 on making everything right here. It had a beautiful close ratio 6-speed, very much the same ratios that you would get in a TZ750. So a real gearbox as opposed to a 5-speed with a low gear for uphill stoplights 2 up. So it was a mixture of pluses and minuses, much like we are ourselves. and it was probably a good thing that we were denied them, because what happens is that there are people who decide to spend $10,000, and they can be very persistent and very clever. And they have a tremendous time making this titanium and carbon fiber extravaganza. And by the time they're ready to casually ride it, they're too old.
Oh, come on.
They feel like,
that's why I wouldn't change the bike at all, Kevin.
There's nobody 40 years old in MotoGP. So
not anymore. Not anymore.
Anyway, it was wonderful that they decided to build this thing, even though everyone had known since the 1970 Clean Air Act that there was a sword of Damocles and an axe of Damocles hold up there
Yep.
where you could see it about to fall, and it did fall in 84, 85.
Yeah.
So Yamaha
Well,
went ahead and built it.
yeah. Well, we got
And
a few into the United States. There were
yeah,
some gray market ones. The reason
yeah,
this bike is so attractive to me is that it's the Japanese market version, and it has the R after the 500, which
yeah,
says aluminum frame, and that's
yeah,
that was like, ooh. I mean, it just made it all the more. I want. I looked at one. I had a racked Triumph TR6 car, like it was two cars welded together. The engine bearings, as I found out later, were worn to the Babbitts. I mean, the thing was just, but it was my car. And I found an RZ 500, not R, for sale, and it was immaculate. It had a California license plate. This would have been 80, probably 87 or 88. I want to say it was $3,500, which was quite a bit of money.
yeah.
And I could get part of the way there with the Triumph if I sold that Triumph. And I really wanted to get it, but Triumph was my only transportation. And I'm like, a 500 2-stroke, can I do this? And I have to borrow money to buy it. So
Well,
I
this
didn't,
is
but that's why the guy started it. He had a 2-car garage, like in Westminster, California, which was just like suburb, like beach suburb, it's like
yeah,
low grade Huntington Beach. Right. So, and I just pulled up, the guy rolled his door up. The bike is immaculate. He's got a 356 in the garage that is perfect. He has an
yeah,
epoxy painted floor. He has outlines for all his tools on the wall. Like, this was the bike to buy. But
yeah.
I was also, I was 18, and I was like, it probably would have suffered, as my RD 400 did, suffered with a high side in my ownership. It was just a fast bike at the time. It wasn't, it was exquisite and it was hard to find, but obviously it made an impression, and all that sound.
Well, another friend described seeing a Ferrari Testarossa for $6,000 or $7,000, and the person kicks him or herself
Yeah.
for the rest of their natural life, thinking, sell everything you have, borrow all you can, and have it. But then
That's what
on
my
my
friend did. I got a friend, man. He's a car collector, and he's got quite a collection of cars, several bikes as well, roughly my age. And when a really exquisite Shelby Cobra came up for sale, he bought it. He sold his house.
now there's
That's dedication, and that's where I say to people who say, like, how did you, like, I had an Aston Martin and I ate macaroni and cheese for a long time to own that car. I sold everything, not my house, because I didn't own one, but I sold everything, and I ate macaroni and cheese for a very long time to own that car. 62 Aston Martin
So
DB4.
here's the proposition: an impulse purchase of an airline ticket. The hotels will be impossibly expensive. Last time I stayed in that town, what was it, $850, I think. But just do it, and then, even if you have no money left at that point, tempt yourself. Walk among these objects and see if you feel a tickle of emotion, or if you are completely and serenely unaffected. Fun.
I don't know, if you want a cheap hotel room, you go to Vegas. we're gonna jump in because you're trying to dash my my hopes and desires. You're bringing out the soulless technician on my RZ 500R and telling me about the 90. And I realize 90-degree intakes you can make airflow quickly, and you can make air go around corners, but you can't do both at the same time, right?
Yeah.
I understand. So, but I want to get your opinion on the 86 Suzuki RG 500 Gamma. This is lot S202, and it's the square 4, and that's the Suzuki, and it's got Pepsi Suzuki livery, so it's an 86. Apologies to Spotify and other audio only. This is a visual podcast. We're we are putting photos of these bikes up. My apologies to you. Just check us out on YouTube if you want to see them. But it's a
Yeah.
beautiful. Now this one's modified. This one has got the Lance Gamma. Lance was this guy who did modifications, and he was a specialist in the Gamma. He did other two strokes, but he was known for his Suzuki. So this thing's got light chambers and alternate disc brakes, and it's just like, it's what you were talking about. Somebody
As far
spent
as you could go.
somebody spent a little money on this bike to modify it, which maybe from a collector standpoint, I'm a rider. I
Yeah.
just can't tolerate having anything that doesn't run and wouldn't function as it did in the day. 37 Velocette KSS I had for a while. I rode that thing back and forth to work, and I did sell it. I regret it. Anyway, 86 RG 500 Gamma. This was the Schwantz livery, and I mean, again, imprinting. I went to Laguna Seca in 88 for the Grand Prix, and I watched, Rainey, Schwantz, Lawson doing all those people. I saw the Kajiva. I saw the Elf with the swing arm front end, and I'm standing on the front straightaway, over basically turn one over the crest at Laguna before they cut the hill away. So you're right there on top of the track. I'm glad they cut the hill away, but I'm sad because at that time, it's like spectating in the old days where we weren't thinking of the riders so much. And I'm glad we cut the hill away, but it was great to be there because they'd come over the hill and they'd be tapped on 4-cylinder 2-strokes making that sound. And this bike evokes that. I watched Kevin come out of turn 4 at Laguna doing what he did, which was like a lot of throttle and then rolling, wheeling, and spinning the tire at the same time. The bike is like wobbling and weaving while he's got a crossed up wheelie driving toward turn 5. You don't get over that, man. You just don't get over that. And this motorcycle, when I look at that, I just think I could have a piece of that, even if I'm not doing exactly that. I feel
because
like
the RG is a lot closer to the real thing.
What was the real
than
thing?
the
It was an
Yamaha
XR45, right? Isn't that what I think that's what they call them, is an XR45?
Yeah, there's a factory designation for those things. We only are given the promotional name. But the wonderful thing about RG500 is that they made a production racer. And one year in the 500 World Championship, I think it was maybe 76, there were 9 Suzuki RGs in the top 10. And there were all the bikes that won points were not Suzuki's, but it was a pretty frequent name as you read down the list. So those were Suzuki's really solid years, 75 and 76 and 77 when Barry Sheen was world champion on those bikes. Factory bikes, not the production semi-replica. But real disc valves, carburetor sticking out of its cheeks.
No elbows to make that happen. That's where they belonged.
And the rear cylinders exhausting straight back. It's very pleasant to contemplate.
Very pleasant. See, that's good because you always have over the decades evoked the soulless technician, but we still find pleasure in there somewhere. Anyway, neat bike. It's got Jolly Moto expansion chambers, Lance Gamma clutch upgrade kit, close ratio 6-speed undercut and polished transmission from Gearboxes of Italy. Like, it has this laundry list of loving care.
Yes.
And that's sort of, I love a real original bike, but thoughtful upgrades, particularly on a bike where, what do you say about that? You want what it is, but you covet also what it does.
Yes.
And that, for a bike, for me, this is a highly emotional thing. And then I bet there's a pretty nice hit about 9,500, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, that's I Heart Motorcycles. That's sort of my little contribution, my 2 strokes and Kevin's insights into their construction and why I might want one over the other. Why not get them both is my
Yes, certainly.
possible argument. What would you like to talk about next, Kevin, from your list?
Well, that 1903 Thor, in combination with the lady's safety bicycle, those represent the confluence of the bicycle and the internal combustion engine. So they're really little examples of the motorcycle's origin story.
So what's Kevin's got here will show an 1880s ladies safety bicycle. Basically bearings, chain, kind of that all came.
Seamless steel tubing.
Seamless steel tubing came together, and the safety, we were talking about penny farthings. Bicycles were
pneumatic tires.
And pneumatic tires. So bicycles were sort of I don't know, what were they? They were kind of the weirdos thing.
But it became huge in around 1895. It was just a mad craze. Everybody had to have one. And unlike the penny farthing, which was basically one gigantic wheel with a little a tail caster trailing behind, and a lot of athleticism required to leap up and pedal off. But with a safety bicycle, you could put down one foot and pause.
Yeah, gearing. You didn't have to use a wheel and an axle as your gearing and make the.
You weren't pedaling the wheel; you were pedaling a crank. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's really cool. And then we finally got engines, right? We got engines that were sort of compact and actually, not bad.
And a lot of the motorcycles around the world originated because somebody bought from de Dion and Georges Bouton, who were making little four-stroke engines with automatic intake valves in Paris. They had sold like 20,000 of these by 1900. So that little engine and safety bicycle, you sort of look from one to the other and think, bring them together. Because pedaling uphill on a single gear bicycle, you apply yourself until you can taste blood, and then you can't give any more. But you'd like more. And these little putt-putt engines, which could reach 2,000 or 3,000 RPM, were available from this French outfit. And so many motorcycle manufacturers began either with genuine de Dion Bouton four-stroke engines or with copies. For example, Glenn Curtis, he wanted to go faster. He bought a casting set from an outfit in Buffalo, New York. Build your own Otto cycle engine, Otto, O-T-T-O. And that's what he and his friend Charlie Kirkham did. They machined the castings. They made a carburetor out of a coffee tin and probably a sleeve off of an old shirt. And basically, the earliest carburetors were just a piece of cloth soaked in gasoline with the intake air passing through it. And he nearly put himself in the lake with this thing. It started to fire. It was running. They'd made this wonderful thing. So immediately he ordered a bigger casting set because the outfit understood the Sloan principle, which was start them out with a Chevy, tempt them with an Oldsmobile, see how long it takes them to reach Buick. And finally he had the biggest motor that this outfit would build. So he decided, now we'll add a cylinder, V-twin. So
that's something that evaporative carburetor, that's some of them
1898.
They had wicks, like a wick that was, kind of off-gassing fuel out of shudder to think if we had a backfire. And then the you were talking about an automatic intake valve, and if you don't know what that is, you had an intake valve that was on the intake stroke, the piston's coming down, it makes a vacuum in the cylinder, which reduces the pressure versus atmosphere. There's a very light spring, and it's only the differential in pressure that pulls, it
pushes a valve open, and
and then
the cylinder fills itself through the little whistling gap between the valve and its seat. Then
so
when the
not
piston rises, click, the valve shuts.
yep,
So it's
and so,
like a same principle as a reed valve. It's a one-way valve with a spring. And I had an early days Evinrude outboard motor that had such a valve in it, made of brass. Anyway, the 1903 Thor. Thor didn't last through the vicissitudes of the years between the wars, but so many motorcycles did. And the principle here is that, first of all, the bicycle became inevitable once those four inventions came into being, which Mark listed. And the internal combustion engine was arriving at the same time, and it was just a natural.
and I mean,
Anyone who,
essentially, yeah, it's a moped. I really had a Thor experience when I was a kid because I bought a Batavus HS50,
yeah,
and it was a moped. It had pedals, and it was a motor bicycle, and it it sort of followed the letter of the law, and it had a pretty weedy little 50cc two-stroke and a not very good exhaust system. And I did a few modifications to it, made it run a little bit better. But it was that miracle of getting up the hill, as you were describing, riding a bicycle versus something. I just put a full face helmet on because I was 14 and it wasn't illegal, right? And I could it wasn't a lot of performance, but it was a miracle. And
you got it.
I'm sure that's how it felt when when Curtis got on his motorcycle and fired it up and rode toward the lake. Imagine what that must have been like. Well, especially to machine your own cases. Anyway, that's the safety bicycle and the Thor is a great.
It's a point of origin story.
The launching point of motorcycling.
Yeah.
Confluence of technologies. So you picked an XR and I've picked an XR. I picked a 1972 Harley-Davidson XR TT.
Which is a road racer?
It's a road racer, XR TT. So it was a 750, and it was the alloy head version, so it was the overhead valve.
And when you look at it, your mind says Calvin Rayborn.
It does, yeah.
Because he was Harley's miraculous star rider who went to the English match races in 1971 with the Mark II version of the Iron Sportster, or Iron XR rather, and showed the English the way around their own tracks. And this was a terrible shock to the Europeans because they knew that Americans were overweight, aggressive gentlemen on motorcycles that weighed as much as two of theirs.
Bloody colonists.
So, and of course, that motorcycle, with as heavy as it was and made out of the American agricultural tradition, as some people would have it, had been optimized. It wasn't just something that somebody built off a drawing. It says here to make it 4.216 inches. It was the result of a number of riders in many races coming up with something that steadily worked better and better. So it shouldn't be a surprise. It was the best that America had to offer at the time.
And gorgeous. I mean, gorgeous if it just...
You like orange and black?
Yep. pretty lovely. There's a VR 1000. So that was the 90s superbike that Harley made with the 60-degree V twin. It's got Mike Smith numbering on it, 911 or 911 at the time. And I was tempted to pick both of those just because what wonderful bookends of road racing they would be. And then you'd be obligated, of course, now to get a bagger. You'd have to try to get Harley to build you a racing bagger to put into your collection, one of the low production. I've always had, say, a predilection for European and English, cars and motorcycles, and some Italian, and some oddball stuff. But I've grown to appreciate American cast iron. There's a certain, I don't know, there's something. What was it? I don't know. It's so practical. It's such a
Yes, it
practical mass production thing.
And it's empirical, because it looks crazy. You look at it and you say, "Oh, well, that can't work because the swing arm is attached to a backbone frame, and it's just going to waggle from side to side." But that tomahawk on the back of the engine connected to the top of the engine through an L bracket, which was originally probably forged steel, I'm not sure. Later it was aluminum, but that basically tied the swing arm pivot to the engine cases in a can't say no fashion. So, and I remember Dick O'Brien sort of lecturing me on this. He said, "It may look that way to you, but I can tell you that it works." And that's the empiricism that you're talking about. This is cut and try until you succeed. And O'Brien said that when young fellas got on the road racer, at first they liked the longer swing arm. Once they got the hang of it, they wanted a shorter, quicker turning wheelbase. And those people knew a lot in the days when Harley had a racing team with its own machine shop and a shop foreman. Now, I don't know how they're fixed for organization with the baggers racing, but it's obviously been effective. And of course, American empiricism has long been admired and scoffed at, because people will say, "Well, you just tried different things until it worked, but you don't know anything." I don't think anyone would get away with saying that Dick O'Brien and the men around him didn't know anything. They went to England with that Mark II Iron XR on racetracks they'd never raced on before, and they got that thing working, and Calvin showed them the way around. So not bad for empiricism.
Not bad at all.
Yeah.
I'm going to pick another bike because it's relevant to the other two strokes.
Yeah.
And I think you'll have something to say about it. And I was surprised it wasn't on your list. There is a, let's see, look here. 1930 Scott Flying Squirrel. 600cc parallel twin two-stroke. Semi-perimeter frame. Water cooled. This is a 3-speed. It's rigid, in the 1930. That's kind of what you got. But Scott is so interesting. They made good power. They had TT success.
1912, 1913, they won the senior. And I was thinking about that this morning. One of the features has to be the water cooling, because water, being 830 times denser than air, can carry away a lot of heat. And two strokes, of course, have the problem that their pistons are heated every time they come to top dead center. They fire twice as often as a four-stroke. That means the pistons have half as much time in which to cool themselves by contact with the cylinder wall. Well, if you water cool the cylinder wall, it's going to be a more comfortable place for a piston. Ah, I feel that warm water. Cyril, come quickly. The soap has floated quite out of reach.
But
So,
yeah, I look at the Scott and I see every Yamaha road racer. I see NSUs. I see everything until we went V-twin on a two-stroke to make room for bigger ports.
well, it was a very primitive two-stroke in that it had a deflector piston. So if you looked cross-section a cylinder from front to back, you would see the exhaust port aiming out one side and the transfer port aiming right at the exhaust port.
Ooh.
And to prevent that flow from just sayonaraizing out the exhaust port, there was no EPA out there going. They put a wall on the piston so that the fresh charge entered the cylinder, swooped up the deflector, and went up over the cylinder head and back down to the exhaust. And while that flow was taking place, the piston was on its way to closing the exhaust port. So the deflector piston doesn't look all that different from a late British twin with 10-to-1 pistons.
Oh yeah,
Because
big
there's
domes.
this big dome, but on one side it's kind of scooped out in this L-shaped way to deflect the fresh charge to keep it away from the exhaust port. So, but Adolf Schnerle, who invented the system where there are two fresh charge ports, one on either side of the exhaust port, aimed away from it. That way the flow went to the back wall, up, over the cylinder head, and back down to the exhaust. So the same loop is traveled by the fresh charge to keep it away from the exhaust as long as possible.
Giving the exhaust time to close.
Yep. So the deflector piston had a lot of surface area, but this engine wasn't making a tremendous amount of power. 25 horsepower from a 600, that's pretty easy duty. So they could get away with things at that power level that you wouldn't get away with at double that power level, even with water cooled.
So yeah, I think it was sort of circa 1950. Scott was at it, but it carried on, I want to say, into the 70s as the Silk.
Yeah, the Silk came along, and that was the bike that David Roper decided to ride because it would only go 90 miles an hour. So he wouldn't have to win races and therefore be pursued by volunteer friends whom he didn't know. So he could play with the front end, which he loved to do in corners on the Silk, and be out of the picture at the prize giving. It was a nicely finished motorcycle. It hummed along. And I think that in 1912 and 1913, the four-stroke brigade they didn't yet have the lessons of World War I aviation. Everyone was ready to roar in 1919, the year after the World War I was over. All that had been learned in the air could now be applied to motorcycles by such companies as AJS, who kept going to do we want to do overhead cam? No, let's do overhead valve. Do we want, they just tried so many things. And I think that was the between the wars years were a time of rapid progress in motorcycle engine design.
Well, I'm going to pick one off of your list, Kevin.
Okay, go for it.
There are three available 1998 Yamaha YZF R1s. And I absolutely 100% agree with you that this is an excellent choice. There's three available. Two of them are blue. One of them is that red and white that was so evocative at the time.
It was.
And what a change it brought. It was a leader bike. We did a podcast on the R1 last year.
Yep.
It was a leader bike that really changed how we perceived what motorcycles could be.
Yeah. Well, there's a terrible thing, of course, that affects high performance vehicles of all kinds, including fighter aircraft. And that is, well, our latest study has shown that this 20 millimeter cannon needs to be replaced by a 23, and unfortunately weighs 95 pounds more. We want to add these extra fuel tanks. It's just going to be a matter of 12 or 1,500 pounds. We want to upgrade everything. And before long, you've created a monster that now it needs a bigger engine to even take off, which needs a bigger fuel tank, which needs more rugged landing gear.
I don't know why, but it makes me think of the Suzuki GS 1150 ES. It was an 80. The one I always looked at was an 84, I think. And it was just before the GSXR. And it was sort of, it had the bull door, big round headlight and everything. Yep. But it was a big, long, heavy motorcycle that really was pulling from the past and trying to dress itself for the present, basically.
So that GSXR 750 of 85, 86 just discarded 100 pounds of ugly fat in comparison with what sport bikes had been before that. And in doing so, Suzuki created a market for themselves that persists to this day, really.
Yes.
Because their bread and butter was sport bikes. 600, 750, 1,000, or 1,100. And everyone else produced the lineup of sport bikes because the market called for that. But Suzuki really went after it in a big way. Well, the process of bloat never ceases. And also there is the you feel the hand of caution on your forearm as you begin to draw the sport bike of the future, because they're saying, frankly, we had a meeting on this, and we don't think that ordinary riders can even operate this motorcycle. And our lawyers have advised us not to build it. But what has to happen at the same time is that chassis, suspension, and tires are improving all the time, and you're hoping that you will produce a motorcycle that has the stability, the responsiveness, powerful brakes, is intuitively easy to ride, so that higher performance with lower weight will be perfectly manageable. And so when 1,000cc bikes looked like they were going to be a powerful market, the Japanese were really doing the soft whistle, looking at the sales stats. Yamaha produced this R1, which caused people to say, it feels like a 250. It's so little.
It was such a remarkable change. And I think we owe the existence of the R1 to the CBR 900RR.
Yeah.
Because that motorcycle in 92, 93 took, Tadao Baba, the large project leader,
yes,
was designing a bike that he wanted a bigger circle. He wanted performance that was accessible, lightweight, agility, ease of riding, big power. And they put together this bike that was extremely lightweight, that was near leader class, and was really game-changing in many ways. But by the time, I think that's a blueprint for the R1, but the R1 just said, no, we're going 1,000cc, and we're not really looking for a bigger circle. I mean, I wouldn't call that R1 easy to ride. It was it was dynamic. It had a 2-peaked torque curve that was quite exciting.
Quite exciting.
But and negative travel, which was something we talked about. It was marketing for extending the fork. They had more extension, so the travel they said was 140 millimeters. Its conventional compression was 120, but it had 20 millimeters extra extension because it was so powerful that it would allow the wheel to droop more to stay on the ground slightly longer as you accelerated. And actually it did.
Longer.
Oh my God. I mean, it was really the first bike I rode that was capable of the long driving power wheelie.
Yeah.
Just you're up over the front trying to keep it down, and it's just going toward the next corner, and it's floating. And then you sometimes would be surprised by input that, oh, the wheel's not actually touching the ground.
Yeah.
You would barely perceive that. Anyway, remarkable bike. There's 3 of them, and one of them's got 4,300 miles. I feel like now would be the time. They look like all 3 have stock exhaust systems, and you know, these sport bikes suffered the fate of many sport bikes where lots of people got them and they modified them and they did crazy stuff. These are, by all accounts, like beautiful stock versions of an iconic. I said it. I'm sorry. Take a drink. I won't say iconic again.
I'll see your iconic and raise you asperities.
Yeah. Ooh, shots for everyone.
One more thing about before we move on is that I did have a wonderful clarifying conversation with a Japanese engineer who said that when they were contemplating the 904, that there was this objection. They said, this motorcycle will be unrideable for the common mill run rider. So they developed what they called a rideability index, by which they hoped to make future high-performance bikes eminently rideable. What they discovered with this was that when they improved the power curve, they made the steering adequately quick but not taking you by surprise, when they made things the way people were comfortable with them, professional riders also went faster on that motorcycle. Because we come to associate wild and crazy motions, wheel in the air, back tire spinning, with racing success. But the fact is, riders would rather not have to do that crazy stuff. They would like to just gas it away from competition. And I've seen that too. So Honda's rideability index undoubtedly has had a lasting influence. Everyone, I'm sure, has something similar, so that they don't drop something on the public that is especially difficult. You can't enjoy something that is. A friend of mine went racing, and he said, I enjoy it afterwards. Because he actually didn't enjoy racing, but he enjoyed having raced.
Oh.
So motorcycle we ride motorcycles because it's fun, it's a pleasure. It requires you to give everything so that it clears your mind. These are wonderful attributes, and we want the motorcycle to be under our control. So.
Well, one more vote for the R1 is I did a shootout when I was with Cycle News, and we had the ZX9, Kawasaki ZX9, and the R1, and a CBR 900RR, and the late Dirk Vandenberg was the test rider for Honda, and they had done quite a bit of work to that, the 98 CBR 900RR. It had a 918 cc engine, as I recall, and they, air quote, fixed the trail. They gave it a little more trail, and it was actually a really well-developed extension of what the CBR 900RR was. And then we tested it versus the R1, and it was the R1 just basically slaughtered the competition because it was the next chapter
Mm-hmm.
of what a 1,000cc sport bike would be, and has led us to where we are today. And if all the manufacturers agreed, we would let other manufacturers ride the bikes. If we had time at the end of the day, we would say like, hey, we have a half hour of track time, 45 minutes. Are you guys okay trading bikes? You want to sample each other's product? Are you cool with that? And manufacturers they were eager to do this usually if everyone agreed.
Yeah.
And Yamaha was like, oh yeah, you go ahead and ride that. And so Dirk took that out. The Honda guy took out the Yamaha R1, and he was wheeling off of every corner, and he just did a few laps, and he came in and he was sweating and he was breathing hard, and he said, oh my God, we have so much work to do. So that was a great point in history to see that, to experience that moment, a private little moment. What do you got next, Kevin? What would you like to tuck in here?
Oh, well, one of the things that interested me was the Harley EL
Yes.
of 1937.
Call it by its street name, man.
Yeah, the
Knucklehead.
Which is a fanciful description of how the end faces of the rocker boxes appear to people. And Harley had built overhead valve engines previously. They'd built some singles and some racers and so forth. But this was a huge change for them because both Indian was still building side valve flathead engines with the valves, instead of being above the cylinder, they were beside the cylinder, which required an extension of the combustion chamber over those valves. And that limited power. And for many years, there had been intake over exhaust, which was really a step forward from automatic intake. They put a little tower there with on top of the intake valve with a little rocker arm, teetle, teetle, teetle. And that was the first cam controlled intake valves. And so Harley built engines that were half modern for most of the between the wars years. And along came the Depression and cleaned out most of their rivals. It just slaughtered them. There was nothing being sold. Indian was down to 1,600 bikes a year in 1933. So it was a moment for a successful company to get market share. The Japanese are wonderful at this. Harley designed an overhead valve V-twin, which essentially doubled their horsepower. And there were teething problems and so forth, but the EL, or Knucklehead, was the first of the big twins which have persisted to the present moment, and the faithful have memorized all the names of those big twins. They're getting more abstruse all the time.
But it's what we buy today. I mean, essentially,
Yeah.
the EL, the profile of the EL, when you go and you buy a Softail and you see the line from the steering head that essentially goes to the rear axle,
Yes, sir.
and the 45-degree V-twin of some girth, but also delicacy. You know, it's big and heavy, but you can still see through a Harley.
It has
Right.
line. It has
Yep.
line.
Well, that's the bike we're buying. That's
It's
what we're
not
getting.
just a lump, it has line. Yeah.
Yeah.
It may require that special affection that many Americans have for a heavyweight motorcycle that will take you to Vancouver, no question. And the EL was the first step in that direction, and it was exceedingly brave of the motor company because there was the Depression. with the sword and the cleaver of Damocles. But Harley weathered it. And Indian had things happened to Indian. And in 1953, they closed. And they became vaporware. For many years, there were efforts to revive them. And now Indian is back as a major brand of motorcycle in the United States, which adds a nice balance to things, and it allows people to enjoy contentiousness.
Yeah. Well, it's made bagger racing extremely exciting.
Yeah.
I will see your knucklehead and raise you a Crocker.
Yes. Well, Crocker.
So sorry. So this is lot S108.2, and this is the previously owned by Ernie Skelton, who was a Crocker specialist. And Crockers, I mean, man, they look great. I've heard them. Dale Wachsler had one that he would run at his museum. The late Dale Wachsler, Wheels Through Time. Magnificent V-twin American motorcycle. These were sort of,
it's the be all you can be of American motorcycles.
Yeah.
The concepts, the advanced concepts that Harley had to set aside because they were trying to do the EL on an economical, do not go out of business basis.
Yeah, well, who's still making bikes, I guess.
Yes. But the Crocker was the daydream of American motorcycles. It's what could be if you said yes to all these concepts. And it was never produced in any numbers.
200, I think, is about what they did.
Yeah.
From about 35 to 40.
But it was influential because it showed what could be and what would come to be. It predicted the future. So the Crocker is I'm sure that would make your wallet thinner to take that one home.
Well, that's the point. Yeah, that's going to be the pointy end. But there's, I think, yeah, I mean, it would make a knucklehead look affordable, and those are relatively. You got to spend some money to get a nice original knucklehead.
Yeah,
fairly expensive. But other things at the auction, I'm looking at S91 that you picked. Lot S91 is a 1962 Triumph 650 Bonneville, and that's the last year of pre-unit, is it not?
Yeah, I think so.
And that's the nice thing with Triumphs is they're massively affordable still. There are some real exquisite ones that will cost you a little bit more money, but there were enough of them made, and there were enough enthusiasts who wanted them that they've survived. They're restorable, the parts are available, and they're relatively affordable. Your ability to get a pretty nice Triumph twin is right there.
Well, the thing was that up to the Second World War, there were Indian men and Harley guys. And that was the sharp end of American motorcycling. Which are you? There's no in between.
I have to pause you for a Peter Egan story. So Peter did a test with some old Harley and old Indian dealers long ago, and he rode with those guys, and they had vintage Harleys and vintage Indians, and they took a ride. And he asked one of the guys, like, well, what was the difference between, Harley owners in the 40s, and Indian owners? And he says, the Indian guys could usually read. Just thought it was good.
Yeah.
Anyway, carry on.
What happened next was that as Indian lost strength, which they did on a regular basis during the run up to the Great Depression, they put excess cash that they had into some crazy investments that never paid off. They were always doing nutty things like that and persisting all the same. But they failed to come back after World War II. Meanwhile, starting around 1938, British parallel twins, starting with 500s, came into the US, sometimes through Canada, and people liked them because they were light and responsive and they accelerated well. Well, by 1962, the post-war world had been divided into Harley guys and Limey guys. And Limey covered all the British twins, Norton, Triumph, BSA, etc. And they each had their advantages. Harley's response to the British invasion, because that's what it was, the British Board of Trade basically got these guys into a room and said, you will export 70% of your production because England needs hard currency. Get to it. And they did. They exported a lot of bikes. And Harley's response was to increase the displacement of their new K model from 750 to 883 or thereabouts. Still not enough, because those were flatheads where the air had to go up to the valve, across the valve chamber, down into the cylinder, and it seemed to lose its sense of proportion on the way, so that the power could be good for a flathead. But the British twins were strong. So Harley then came back and said, okay, we'll build Sportster. It'll have overhead valves. And they built the Sportster on the unit construction K model bottom end. And it was sort of a draw at that point. Then along came the Honda CB750 in 1969 and the Kawasaki H1. And suddenly Harley guys were saying, yeah, them crotch rockets are fast, but man, we're cool. And there was no answer to that on either side. The high performance thing definitely went to Japan. The cool has stayed with Harley.
Mass market, man. That's been proof. Harleys are mass market motorcycling, and then the rest is we're all hobbyists. It's virtues on either side. But the Bonneville I would pick is lot F61. It's a 59 T120 Bonneville, so it was a first year Bonneville. Alloy cylinder head. My 58 Trophy had one of those. Pretty nice 8 stud at that time. This is the arcane knowledge you get when you discover your cylinder head is cracked and want to get a replacement, and you look for an 8 stud, not a 9 stud. But gorgeous colors, Concord restoration, and a nacelle headlight. See, that's imprinting for me. The Triumph nacelle headlight really, I find, I don't know, hard to resist.
They tried to market that bathtub job. I don't even know the name of it. But it had so much bodywork on it. And what that represented was a long-running strain, a tendency in the motorcycle business to say, let's make a motorcycle more like cars, and then motorcycles will sell like cars. We'll make them clean. We'll make them quiet. We'll make them good smelling. And equip them presumably with a living room set. And it never has worked. Vincent built the Black Prince, the squeaker, covered with fiberglass panels. You imagine them all jiggling together and making that horrible squeaking sound?
No, that was a thing for a while. Everyone in England envisioned, this was the future, and they all put bodywork. Belisette did it. Dang, take a drink.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've revisited that at periodic times.
Yes, such as Honda's Pacific Coast.
Yes.
So it's a multi-headed monster that rises from the slime periodically to wind itself around our ankles, and we have to sort of give our feet a shake and carry on. But there it comes back again and again. Wonderful.
I think the last bike I would like to feature is a 1962 Honda CA 100 50cc step through for, I hope, obvious reasons.
Yes. In 1958, Honda designed a winner. The 50cc step through had an automatic clutch, 3-speed, I think, and it had big wheels, which meant that streets that were not in good shape after 4 years of warfare were no place for little scooter wheels. I rode a scooter into a pothole once and went nose over. And they sold millions of those little bikes. And this was at a time when there were 200 companies in Japan, all imagining that their startup was going to be the one favored by the gods. And one by one, they winked out until there were only 4 or 5 left. Tohatsu winked out, Tokyo Hatsudoki Corporation. And what the little 50 did was, in America, it showed that motorcycles do not give you tattoos, as Phil Schilling once said. They were fun. They were innocuous. They were harmless. And for Honda, this success funded their ambitions.
More than 100 million. More than
Yeah.
100 million over time. I think the 100 million mark was, I want to say 10 or 15 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, they just sold and sold. This was lot W291, and it's immaculate. It's just gorgeous. A couple shades of blue, and what a world-changing motorcycle.
Because it was the first step, like the Chevrolet was for General Motors in their early years. Get on one of these and learn to ride a two-wheeler. Next thing, you might want a 200 or a 125. Well, we have those too. And it led people by easy steps to full-size motorcycles. And in one of our recent podcasts, we discussed the Suzuki X6. I think those middleweights, as they were then, were a market test. Is that enough? Would you like more? You would. We'll bring it. And here came CB750 from Honda and H1 from Kawasaki.
Both of which you can get at this auction, by
Yes,
the way,
indeed. Yes,
in multiple
indeed.
forms. I think I counted 23 Triumph Bonnevilles, just anything named Bonneville.
Yeah.
So I told a little lie. I said that the Honda 50 was the last bike. I want to get to one of my I love motorcycles bikes. It's out of the Paul Adams collection. So one of the things about consigning, you can consign a single bike, no problem. You just call Mecum and you'll go through it and get them photos and all that, and they'll market the bike for you and so forth. But if you have a collection and you're deciding to downsize, you're deciding to take this and buy that Crocker, you have somebody like Paul Adams, who I know, and I mentioned earlier. If you want an overhead cam Norton, a Paul Adams overhead cam Norton is not a bad one to choose. And the one I want to talk about is the Norton International Model 30. It's a 37. The reason I picked it is because it has lights, and I'm a street guy. I mean, as much as I love racing, I want a motorcycle I could ride around on the street. And this thing is a knockout. I mean, it was also, these were the production race bikes of the era, no?
Yep.
Yep.
What happened was that Norton hired Walter Moore to make the Pushrod 500 win the TT. And eventually it became necessary to make a real race bike out of it with a single overhead camshaft, which happened in 1927. And there were vicissitudes. I've never seen one, but people always talk about vicissitudes. Things happen. Anyway, it wasn't solidly successful until it was redesigned by Arthur Carroll, but the original design, called CS1 Camshaft 1, has persisted with modifications as the Norton International. And when I was a suffering college student, there was, on my way to class, a motorcycle parking area. And there was an international sitting there. Somebody's grand tour the previous summer had begun with buying of this thing, and chuck, 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 off into the distance. And it's not a Manx, but it's a step on the way to the Manx. And the actual double overhead cam race bike didn't come about until 1937. And of course, the thing about single overhead cam versus double overhead cam is that single overhead cam requires rocker arms, and double overhead cam allowed you to drive the valves with normal tappets. They called them pushers. And the valve moving mass was less in the double overhead cam version, so that it could reliably operate at higher RPM. But there was this marvelous step-by-step inevitable development of the Arthur Carroll bike during the interwar years to a level of sophistication that was really quite sensational. So that when Tony Vandervelde, the engine bearings mogul, who was racing Ferraris with his famous thin wall bearings in them, wanted to build a Grand Prix car, they used the Norton single cylinder head as the model for their four-cylinder Grand Prix car engine. And the early versions for test actually used Amel GP carburetors as throttle bodies.
Why wouldn't you? This is what we call inspiration, folks. It's not stealing, it's inspiration.
Yes. But what had happened was, you see, that by focusing on one cylinder in the interwar years, the people that were developing these motorcycles, the AJS, the Velocette, the Norton, were learning about intake tuning, exhaust tuning, the effect of megaphones, valve angle, compression, combustion, because they had only one cylinder to think about. I used to hate it when I would do what I thought was a bang-up job of porting one cylinder of a TZ750 road racer and then think, oh, now I have to do the other three.
But that's how development was, right? I mean, you know, Cal Carruthers, retired Cal Carruthers, came back and was doing cylinders for Chaparral, I think. Yeah, Chaparral. And he was doing moto and also some watercraft work.
He did.
And he would just use one cylinder, and he would make a pipe, and he would, you know, you got the one cylinder and you do your trick and you, oh, yeah, nailed it. And what's great about now is I got a tour of Millennium Technologies in Wisconsin while I was in Wisconsin for Christmas. And there's a guy, he's the Hayabusa specialist, and he's off in North Carolina, and he ports one cylinder on the cylinder head. And he sends the cylinder head to Millennium, and they put it in their porting machine and scan it. And he's done the magic work. I've mic drop, I'm finished. Copy that.
Yes.
And the machine does all the other cylinders. So Kevin, news for you, buddy.
Yes.
We can automate. Anyways, Las Vegas motorcycle auction, South Point Hotel and Casino. Las Vegas, Nevada, 2,000 motorcycles, January 29th through February 1st. One thing we didn't talk about was kind of the marquee bike. There's a Cyclone coming out from the
Oh,
Urban S. Hirsch, the third collection. It is a beautiful bright yellow machine, restored by Stephen Wright, who was one of the really probably the preeminent American motorcycle restorer and historian. He's got a book that
you
is,
must have both volumes.
yeah, it's hard to find. And we recommended books in the program. And then in the comments, somebody says, that book is $2,000 on Amazon. I'm like, sorry,
Yeah.
but they are beautiful, beautiful books. And that's kind of it's something to watch at that auction. If nothing else, you can watch it online and you can bid online. It's, I just want to go stand next to that dang thing.
The Cyclone is a sort of a pre-Crocker in that it incorporated the best thinking of the time. But unfortunately, it was not much of a company. And so it couldn't back up its design with the R&D to make it win races. And that happens all the time. When BRM devised their centrifugally supercharged V16 1500cc Grand Prix car in the
Raymond Mays.
in the late 40s, he has a little book out too called Split Seconds. That's a good read.
Oh, it's superb. Yep.
He got a visit from Alfred Neubauer, who had long been the manager of the Mercedes racing team. And Neubauer took it all in as he was toured through the facility. And they said, well, what do you think? Undoubtedly, he is thinking about lunch because he was a substantial man. But he turned to his inquisitor and said, this has many wonderful design features. Unfortunately, your organization lacks the R&D substance to make it successful. Because you've got to have more than one old guy in octagonal wireframe glasses and a leather apron craftering away. You've got to have Steve Whitelock and I. Steve Whitelock worked for Yvonne de Hamel when he rode Kawasaki's. We used to fantasize about rows of machine tools becoming invisible in the distance because of the thickness of the air between, with saluting technicians at each one ready to make whatever was necessary. And that's basically what HRC has been for so many years, because it takes real clout. You can have an idea, but if you can't make it work and show the people with the money that you can make things that work, it's just a curiosity. So,
And people today persist with building motorcycles from scratch all the way down to the engine. And that's what I love about motorcycles is it's fine. It's not going to be a Honda. It's not going to be a Ducati, but there's a guy, Cosentino, who's built a scratch road racer out in his own engine. And I mean, I don't know. It's for the dreamers, Kevin.
I've known several of those guys who went through multiple marriages because these women would just say, well, that's the fourth night in a row that he hasn't come home. The fifth night, I'll be gone. And it doesn't bother them because they're so focused. Their ideas are begging to be realized in metal. And it's going to be so wonderful. And one person can't really do all those things. That's the hard thing, is that the motorcycle appeals to the individual, but to make excellent motorcycles requires an organization. And so bring those two nuclei together, repelling each other like protons.
Well, which one I know, but which one's going to cost you more at the Vegas motorcycle auction? A Crocker or an EL?
Yeah,
Crocker's going to
well,
cost you. Well,
yeah.
there
Well,
is that.
The Crocker, the Vincent, and the Bruff, all are bathed in that glorious royal purple of the past, and it hasn't lost any of its luster. It's
Yeah,
powerful.
no. Well, we'll talk about Bruff in an upcoming podcast. How's that?
Let's do that.
I didn't get to talk about my Bimota KB1 at the auction. 76 Bimota KB1. I thought, what a bike of the future at the time. It had a frame. It was answering the problem.
Yeah.
It was answering the problem, which was we got tons of power, but we can't get the thing to the ground, and we can't make it turn. We can't. It answered the problem. And Bimota,
Yes.
Tamburini, later of the Ducati 916. I mean, he's cutting his teeth in Italy, making custom frames. Essentially, KB is Kawasaki. Bimota 1 is the first one. Has the 903 in it. There, we talked about it. You can buy that at the dang auction. That's what's so beautiful to me about going to Mecum and looking at that, is it's just deadly to see all of that and just to think, well, if I show up and I really want it, I could have it.
Yeah.
It might be a little wrestling match, but I could have it, maybe.
Yes. And also, there is pleasure in desire that is unsatisfied.
It's true. Thanks for listening, folks. The link to Mecum auctions is in the description of the video. You can go check out the lots, register to bid, consign your collection to a future auction. Again, Mecum does motorcycle auctions throughout the year. Monterey is one. They bring 100, 200s to other auctions. Of course, Las Vegas is the one where you get thousands, and it's wonderful and overwhelming, and there's no lack of hotel rooms, and there's good food, and it's wonderful and exhausting and overwhelming, and just walking the rows is worth it in and of itself. So check it out. Thanks for listening. We appreciate the sponsorship. Click through that link. Check it out. It makes a difference to us. We're happy to have Mecum as a sponsor, and we will catch you next time.